Comic Hour with your host, Andrea Lemire.
And Chris Ramos.
I am with our featured guest,
Blaize Butler.
Blaize, welcome to the show. And tonight we are reviewing Gideon Falls by Jeff Lemire and Andrea Sorrentino, and with colors by Dave Stewart.
The man, Dave Stewart.
Yes, absolutely. Blaize, tell us a little bit about yourself and your comic book origins.
Well, it's not a long story. This is my first comic book I've ever read, thanks to Chris. Some may
Brought her
say,
in, right?
Some may say it was a joke that went a little too far.
We caught her.
Yes,
Yep.
absolutely.
Got peer pressured.
Oh, that's cool. What books have you read before, I guess, before this comic book? Like, I heard you were into novels.
Yeah, I like more like the sci-fi murder mystery, which I guess that's why Chris went in this direction. But like, it's easier to say what I don't like. You know, I'm not really that picky, but I don't like the romance novels.
Gotcha.
The dramas, really more into the sci-fi.
Otherworldly things, the
yeah.
supernatural.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, I think this fits the glove.
A
Right?
good wacky story
Yes.
lineup, yeah. And Jeff
Absolutely.
Lemire always kind of delivers something that isn't just the standard run.
Sure.
You know, he just tries to put his little spin on what you would consider predictable, and then Jeff Lemire throws in something that just throws it right out to left field.
Right. Absolutely. And earlier on the podcast in different episodes, we reviewed Black Hammer by Jeff Lemire, and we reviewed Sweet Tooth by him as well. And so I would say Black Hammer's like a superhero book. Let's see, Sweet Tooth is more of an adventure, sci-fi, post-apocalyptic, dystopian book. And so this one is more of horror sci-fi.
Yeah, this one, I mean, with the other ones, I guess if you were traditionally to take apart like a superhero book or even just a regular like sci-fi book, they usually set it up as there's this overarching villain, and then you have some heroes set up, and some of your heroes are flawed. And you know, Jeff Lemire takes that idea and then he puts his own little spin to say, okay, well, what if we took that one step further, or what if we took this one step far? Figure out like
twist it in and out a little bit. Yeah.
Like it's sci-fi, yeah, but it's also kind of just really sort of spooky. Like there wasn't sci-fi to me usually has like a high tech, technology aspect to it.
Yeah, maybe
and there
the
is some of that in
supernatural.
there. Yeah, this is more of like supernatural. Would you agree?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, what are your first thoughts or hot take? What'd you think of the book?
Hot take, you say?
Yes, hot take for our listeners out there.
Your elevator pitch of your book. Yeah.
Well, kind of like along with what Chris was saying, I feel like this is definitely going to be a hot take for you guys, but to me, all like superhero like movies or media, it's kind of all the same to me. Don't get mad, but it's like the one or two villains and then the group of superheroes.
Oh, stop recording.
No, I'm sorry.
you're good. No,
I'm
keep going,
sorry,
keep
but then
going.
it's like it almost always follows like the same storylines and has like the same tropes.
Sure.
And then in the end, it's like the good guy always wins.
Mm-hmm. It's very predictable in that way.
Yeah, and I like that this like. Obviously, I didn't finish, but at least so far it was like different twists and turns along the way.
Absolutely.
Instead of just like the same stereotypical tropes, I feel like.
Yeah. I mean, so I think what I'm hearing too is like a lot of people say the same thing about superheroes movies is that no matter what's happening in the story, and this kind of goes with comics too, no matter what happens in the story, you know that in the end that those same characters are going to still be there.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and that's where a lot of times people always say, where is the loss? Like what is the consequence?
Yeah.
How high can these stakes be? Where when you're reading a story like this, and I think that maybe why writers like Jeff Lemire and others kind of get this feel is that this story is something that he just came up with. So it's like right away, all rules are off the table.
Yeah.
Like there's no character in these books that couldn't just be totally extinguished.
Absolutely.
You know, like you wouldn't expect it, right? If you knew that this was like part 1 of 10 and in the 10th novel, the character's still there, like a
Right.
Harry Potter movie or something.
Right,
yeah.
You realize that, okay.
Like Harry
there's
Potter,
service.
can he die?
Yeah.
Or Spider-Man. Is this a Spider-Man book? Spider-Man
Yeah.
is still heroic and everything. He still has all the tropes. No, he's not. There's no Spider-Man here. Anybody's really up for grabs. Absolutely.
So then at least now, I mean, maybe would you say that this helped you kind of like hone in on maybe a genre that you would be looking for in a comic book setting? Because you're already steering away from the mainline superheroes.
Yeah, definitely. And even like, obviously I've never read a comic book before, but even like superhero movies I've never really enjoyed, just because, like I said, I feel like it's always like pretty similar. So I think this definitely opened my world to comic books and trying new forms of
The
Media,
medium.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of people don't realize just how far some comics actually can go.
Yeah.
Where some of them are, well, we talked a little bit about like some are true crime, like they take real life stories and just sort of, put them into a drawn art and story perspective so that you can approach really hard topics, because it's like almost like taking a really, really serious hard topic and sort of making it into a serious cartoon. There's a certain aspect that you're sort of taking out of this sort of real life. And that's why I think a lot of people, even, for some movies, they say, well, gosh, that's really hit close to home, or wow, that's really relatable. And so that was really more spooky for me because I grew up in a small town in Alaska or something, like there's something that connects. Where in some comics, actually, whether it's the way that the art is done or whether the drawing is, or the writing, Jeff Lemire writes really like commonplace, I guess is a good way to say it. Like his writing it's not like super fluffy, and it's not like huge words or languages we're not using. It's pretty much common talk, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
And I feel like even though he does different genres and across many different books, he still has a identifiable voice, and his characters are still grounded in some sort of like common reality that makes it relatable.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I mean, he doesn't really do a lot of crazy, cosmic stuff.
No, and even then
much.
he brings that back to some place of origin too, where it starts before he gets all unhinged.
Well, and another thing too is that he focuses on like the 3 or 4 main characters, and you feel like those are his main story. Yeah,
Right.
There's other people in there, but like he always comes back to these main characters. And I think that helps you kind of navigate through a story like this, because this story kind of gets off the rails a couple times, and you need to find something that you can,
you're familiar.
Yeah,
with.
Yeah,
like
you can settle in.
just one thing you can come back to, and usually it's like, there's the main character.
Yeah.
Right.
They're back on the page.
Well, we even pre-show you were talking about your reading experience. Like you had to go back and reread a bunch of parts again just so it would like all line up.
Yeah, and I was telling Chris before that too, like if there was pages where it was like multiple panels on both of them, I would read it like left to right or left and then down. I would read it like both ways just to make sure like I was getting it like the way that it was intended instead of
Yeah.
like,
Oh, absolutely. With the double page spreads, it's kind of hard sometimes, even like
Yeah.
as a new reader to comics, there's no like, how do you do that?
Yeah. Well, and that goes back to some of the artwork where he flips the page literally upside down.
Yeah.
Where the panels, the characters are upside down, but the lettering is right side up, so that like, oh, well, I don't have to flip this whole book. Because there have been comics we've read where you literally have to flip the whole
The
book.
whole book.
360.
Yeah.
And
then you're like-
experience, so it's intentional.
Yeah. And then you flip it back, and then you flip the book. So this one wasn't meant to like literally flip the book yourself, but it was showing you that it was a unpredictable sort of non-physics space that
Yeah.
didn't have any rules.
Right.
And there's only one way to kind of relate that through the comic page.
Yeah, absolutely. And this book, it was kind of, it starts out horror and then it kind of brings out the sci-fi in it. So that was like in the beginning when you're starting to read this book, you're like, okay, this is like a horror movie I've seen once, or here's some flavor that, I've come across before. But then it kind of just grows out of like the sci-fi thing. You're like, oh, this is so much bigger concept than what they're letting on to.
Yeah, like, so when we first start, we find Norton.
Norton Sinclair.
Norton Sinclair. He's like I don't want to say he's a kid, but he's probably like in his 20s, right? I don't know. something like that.
I'd say early the mid 20s.
And you kind of get the idea right away that he's like homeless or something like that.
Yeah,
I don't know. He
we
feels
encounter
homeless.
our
He's a lonely guy. He
Yeah.
needs a friend or a buddy or something.
right.
Okay, so you find out right away he has no friends
Yeah, and I mean he's digging around literally in the garbage
Yes.
for something.
with gloves and a mask.
Yup.
Like a K95
Yeah.
mask.
Well,
like a
yeah,
COVID
and we
mask.
were talking that this book came out in 2020, so he was
Oh,
kind
that's
of
true.
writing it. Maybe I don't know how far into 2020 it was when this was coming out, but it says December of 20. So I
That's
mean,
what
he
I-
could have been experiencing
Hmm.
some of the world around him and kind of thinking, how can I incorporate that into my
Hmm.
story?
Yeah, that's what I thought at first when I first opened it and saw the mask. I was like, really? Because I don't know if you remembered, like a lot of TV shows, I feel like if they had a new season come out during the pandemic, they would like have COVID in it. And I know
Right.
a lot of like people were upset by that. Like, we come to media to like escape. reality and then
Sure. But
That's
I
a
think
good
the
point.
way, yeah,
But that's a good point, because like right away when you first page, we just talked about how we take these notions that we have in our regular life. So right away, whenever you see that mask, I mean, it's funny now within the last 3 years
yeah,
that you see that mask and people are like, oh,
that's it. Yeah.
COVID.
Mhm.
Like that's what reality of that was. If this came out 10 years ago, you would just think, why the heck is he wearing a mask?
Right. And it's not verbatimly said like COVID existed in this world. It's pretty much saying he chose to wear it.
Yeah, for some
was
reason
for
he's
some
wearing
reason.
a mask, right?
Absolutely. And so we encounter him digging around in the trash like he's collecting something. And this like obsession of just picking out like nails and chunks of
Yeah, like one
wood.
sliver of wood.
Splinters.
Yeah.
And he has like a collection, like a can, this is when I got this sample, what day and you're like, whoa, this is kind of weird. Why is he collecting all these samples? And his home where he lives is, like you said, kind of like this homeless, just kind of really
Basic.
basic, like
it's almost like he's living in a basement.
a
or
base.
something.
Yeah, that's a good way. It's very primitive. He still has a bed and a shelf and everything, and you see his collection, and it's like,
No
okay.
decorations.
No
No.
decorations. No,
No color. No. Well, and speaking of color, so right away, you realize
Andrea,
Dave Stewart
yeah.
set up the coloring in this book,
Yeah.
and it's very
Dave.
drab, and it's
Yes.
very, very. It's not even earth tones. It's
Yeah.
like beyond earth tones. It's like
Sure.
grunge.
Yeah, grunge is absolutely the
Yeah,
right word.
grunge, real like washed out colors. Even when there's
Mhm.
pages where like the sun should be, it's just generally
Yeah, it's
like,
very dreary.
overcast. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
It
a very
reminds-
dreary story to start.
yeah,
It kind of puts you in a mood, huh?
Yeah. The beginning colors, like especially this
when you get in the field.
frame right here when it's the field in the car, like how you said it's so dreary.
Yeah.
It reminded me of Breaking Bad, how
Yeah.
like everything is so sepia, and it's again like a lot of even the clothing that they would wear would be like
Yeah.
drab colors. It reminded me a lot of that show, like the same feeling.
Oh, sure. I could totally see that.
And a lot of colorists will set up like a palette beforehand, and they'll be like, this is the palette I'm using for this comic, and they hardly stray from it. Or if they need to stray, they'll use it for emphasis.
Mhm.
Later on in the book, if they need something that's like super bright, or like bright purple, or just sort of like crimson red, they know that they sort of have that as like an ace up their sleeve.
Right.
Mhm.
Because
Because
you want
they've-
something to be super dynamic.
Yeah, because they've worked on this palette color for so long that when you do introduce real color to it, then it just really jumps.
Yeah.
And that kind of does happen later on, which we'll talk about. But it is right away like you have to match the writing to the art. And I think they did a great job right away to just kind of feel like this isn't the world that we live in
Yes.
or that we are familiar with.
Yeah. And then so Norton's like one of our main characters that we are the reader trying to focus in on, as everything around his life is kind of revolving around him, the cast build around him. And then we meet Father Wilfred, who is a priest, but you can tell him as a priest, he's had like a checkered past. Definitely had some problems with like alcohol and just a messed up upbringing, and just he's kind of turned to faith as something that's supposed to bring him out of it, right? Trying to redeem himself.
Well, and they're sending him to Gideon Falls.
Yes.
And like the church that they send him to is nothing very spectacular.
Yeah,
it's kind of run down already. So you're like,
yeah,
geez.
like a chapel in the middle of the countryside.
Yeah,
like they're loyal, they're faithful, they show up, but yeah, it's very basic,
Like he was the Hail Mary, like they had no hope, and then he just got like thrown in there. Just fend for yourself.
Absolutely.
Well, they find out that the priest that was before him did he retire or he?
I think he died. Yeah, I think he's murdered.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So, okay. And so they kind of sent him out there.
Yeah. So there's already this dreary thing about, what's happening in Gideon Falls. They just experienced this death and they're still kind of coming out of that, but they still need a priest. So he's coming in.
The church must go on.
Okay. I'm here. Yeah. So in the meantime, Norton, he's kind of just going through these visions and these flashbacks. He's seeing something, and he's talking to his psychiatrist, Dr. Zoom.
Well, I think that's another, I don't want to call it a trope, but it's another like sort of misleading storyline that, you see a character that looks flawed or homeless or, like something's off and you're like, geez, something's really off. And then the next scene is like him sitting with a psychiatrist.
Yeah.
So you're like,
okay.
Oh, well, I get it.
Right.
Something's really off. But, I always try to approach those kinds of things in comics and in books too, of just like the writers trying to push a narrative that maybe isn't true.
Right.
And in this case, you start learning a little bit more about Norton. So then you're just like, maybe he really does see something or know something that we don't, or that the rest of the world doesn't. He kind of has that. He's the only one that has this special knowledge, and you're trying to figure out like, what is he even knowledgeable about?
Absolutely. And he can't really come to terms of if this is something that maybe faith is trying to put into him, but is it good? Is it bad? There's this darkness about him. He's like, there's something off here. And so the doctor's like, well, I'm a Buddhist, did you try any meditation techniques, or did you try this? Did you try that? And he's like, yeah, nothing's helping me, but talking it out helps and making him feel like he's not alone in the world.
He is burdened with a knowledge.
Yes. And then we kind of see him moving on in a different panel, and then you just see a screw, not a screw, a nail, just like he picks out, and it's like red. You zoom in on it's red. You're like, ooh.
Yeah.
Dun, dun, dun. Yeah. And so we kind of just travel back and forth, getting to know the town of Gideon Falls and like his cast of characters that builds around him.
Yeah. And you're kind of learning, everyone's storyline pretty slow. So, and that's the other thing too. I think at first, I don't know if this is true, but like Jeff Lemire has already established himself as a good writer before this ever came out.
Right.
So like when you have that reputation, you can take your time on a comic and just sort of let it be this slow build where sometimes if you have a new character that a comic book company is trying to get out the door, or you have a new writer that's trying to prove themselves, they have to like literally throw everything out like the first issue and be like,
oh yeah, it's like, here's my pitch.
Yeah.
Go.
Like I gotta catch you. It's sort of like a new TV series on Netflix or something. Like they have like that first season to like really, really get you. Cause then they realize if it doesn't pick up, then
It's done.
they're done.
Yeah.
One and done.
So for
Yeah.
Jeff Lemire, he's already a pretty established writer, so he can actually take his time and he's not worried about trying to sell this book. I think that this book just became popular because it had that, horror creepy feel that people wanted to sort of learn more about.
Right.
And so he wasn't trying to like pull readers. He was just trying to tell a good story.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it's kind of, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head.
I see what you did there.
There's the pun. That the book does start off very slow in that horror aspect because it really wants to, kind of get the feel of it, get the really establish some characters, start to invest on who's telling the story.
Well, that's like his thing too, right? Character development.
Character
That's
development.
That's like Jeff Lemire's big thing.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a thing with the genre too. Like a lot of like horror movies, I feel like it starts out like, oh, the perfect family and they just bought their new house. And it's like that for a while. And then it's like, oh, but there's demons inside. And then
Yes.
everything turns like a
Mhm.
180 really quickly.
Absolutely.
And then little
And
things.
then
start
until
creeping in.
Yeah.
so many things happen, until some visions, and they wake up and see the black barn.
Yes.
Dun, dun, dun.
And that so again, that to me, it was just like, what? It's just a barn? Like, you wonder what it is. Now, for all of the like synopsis for these, if you were just to grab a Gideon Falls off the shelf, in fact, I think the hardcover book that we're reading,
Yeah.
because we always kind of push that, everything's
The
better to
hardcover
read
collection.
in hardcover collections. It's much better to read as a hardcover. But right away, I mean, they do break down that there's a mysterious legend of the Black Barn.
Yes.
And then it just says right away, an otherworldly building alleged to have appeared in both the city and the small town throughout history, bringing death and madness in its wake. So
Yeah.
like there's going to be this barn that appears, whether it's in the city or rural or wherever. It's just this barn comes in and, everything starts dying or getting ruined from there. So,
Right.
for that, I think
Yeah.
is the biggest thing for us to kind of like focus on is how is this barn affecting the story now that they've set up the
Sure.
story?
And one of the, I guess, movies growing up that that still scares me is Children of the Corn. So
Oh, God.
I was like, oh no, it's Children of the Corn again. It's the barn, and
It's
the
the barn.
field, and the woods. The creepy kids are crawling out. Like, ah.
Well,
Yeah.
but I think a barn is used as like a trope in a lot of things. I
Oh,
mean,
sure.
Walking Dead had this like freaky
Oh.
barn,
Mhm.
and like everyone, because no one knows what's happening in there. It's just this like
Sure.
sort of old school building that's not used. It's just like, I don't know, just it could be a freaky place for money.
Yeah. And the way that Andrea Sorrentino portrays it, it's all very like really like sketched out, and then with the colors of just black and red. Like the sky is red, everything's around him red, and the barn is like the name says, it's black. And so it's just this gives this like grungy, like in your face, like creepy.
Yeah.
I
Well,
love
and
that.
I think it just starts that whole like you said, something's not right now. And now it's like your attention moved from the people and now it's moving into what the heck is this barn?
Right. And why does it keep appearing in somebody's vision? Why is people like obsessing over it? All these questions start to rise up. You're like, okay, this is getting juicy now. All right. Yeah. And then we kind of introduced to like, oh, okay, here's, the doctor's still, his psychiatrist is still like walking with him, she's like, oh, is there something more to this, trying to understand him,
Mhm.
trying to understand her patient more so she can help better, serve him everything. And then you just like, oh, okay, what's going on? He even draws out the barn and it's all just red sketches. Red, like,
Well, and what's happening is too, like you're jumping from one storyline to the next.
absolutely.
So you're jumping from Norton and his
Yes, and-
psychiatrist
yeah,
to
to
the
priest,
preacher
yeah.
and his
Oh yeah, to
deputy,
Clara. Yep, yep.
the
Mhm.
deputy sheriff girl. So it's like the preacher and the deputy sheriff girl, and then jump over to Norton and his psychiatrist.
Right. There's
And
two pairs.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's two like stories going on, and you start assuming that this is sort of the like opposite ends of the world. One's in a city and one's in the rural. So you're like,
Mhm.
oh, it must be just two stories of the same world.
Right. Well, even then, yeah, you're trying to like figure out how to piece them together because Clara, the deputy, she's talking about her missing brother Danny, and we never know really who Danny is until they finally come out and say it. But it was very cool to just see how they tie these two separate storylines together.
Right.
I think anytime you can do that, that's
Well,
awesome.
yeah, I mean, and he kind of did it. You're just waiting for the other shoe to drop, like, but like the story itself, I want to say, let's see, we must be like probably in issue 10 right now.
Yeah.
Because it does go quite a while where you don't realize that, you're 6, 7, 8 issues in and the stories are still developing. And you're like, wow, this is, like I said, taking its time to work on it. And then I think he decides to sort of drop the bomb on us in a little while, right?
Oh yeah. So he's like, okay. And then you kind of, as for spoilers here, we get introduced to the doctor, and the doctor is he said, oh, Dr. Sutton. Yeah, he's really cool. But he's just portrayed as this mad doctor. He doesn't even practice medicine too much anymore. And you can tell he's like a conspiracy theorist, and he's always tracking around the barn and the plowmen. He's got clippings of the first meeting of the plowmen. And you're like, what's that? And it turned out to be like this Brotherhood organization that's been following the Black Barn for eons.
Yeah, and then the art actually. So as the story is getting even weird, when more elements are, when more elements are introduced that are just sort of out there, or you're like, as it becomes more supernatural, the artwork becomes even more and more unhinged too. It kind of follows along with that. The panels start shifting, and then they have even like,
and they start literally like falling apart or off the page.
Yeah. Right. Like you're noticing that it's not like it's breaking the fourth wall that much, but it's showing you different ways to lay out a page that are not traditional. So then you're thinking, well, now that the pages are not becoming, or the pages are falling out of, order, so is this world falling out of order at the same time.
Absolutely. And I even appreciate some of the pages that doesn't even have text on it, or maybe like one word, because there's so much emotion there.
So Blaize, when you're reading through, aside from just sort of the natural idea of like, I have to go from text bubble to text bubble, what else were you really looking at? I mean, were you trying to make sense of the pages, or are you like, this is just kind of getting a little like cinematic or something like that?
Like, do you mean the order which I?
Well, like even at the bottom of, there's one where like the whole panel just becomes words and things like that. Did you see that as just like artistic freedom as far as that part goes?
Yeah, and also, okay, this might sound kind of like loopy, but I feel like when I read like a normal book, obviously like I picture it in my head. Like I feel like everyone imagines like a setting or whatever, and then if there's a certain character or a narrator's voice, they'll have a different voice from mine. But then I feel like with reading this, with how all the different art and like the larger text, I would read it like louder in my head.
Screaming.
Sure.
Or
All
like,
those sound effects. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, also like sound effects, like certain like scenes, I would hear like a car screeching or like the knock knock much more than I do when reading just a normal book, because I already have the images right here. So then my brain gets to make up like
Sure, it
other
gives
parts of it,
it gives
I
that
guess.
space, that freedom to like
like
enhance that sound effect.
artistic freedom for the authors and for me.
Yeah.
Well, I bet that's really good to hear for Jeff Lemire's perspective too, because I mean, he wants to make sure that people are like interacting with the pages, because unlike other comics, I mean, this one actually really does have that like, not that you're just a viewer of it, but you're actually like in there and you're swirling around it and you're like above it and you're below it and you're being affected by explosions and crashes and things. And that's, I think that's really good for any writer to feel like, wow, you're way into the story as much as I want you to be. And that's another thing too. Some comics, and like you said, you haven't read a terrible amount to like compare, but like some of them are like real cosmic, where they're out in space and there's,
Unbelievable.
entire planets, big solar systems being shown on the
Larger
page,
than
right?
life, yeah.
So like it's, as a reader, you're thinking, how much can I really encompass on this? Where this is very like what I would say ground level. I mean, it's the characters are literally, when you're reading it, I mean, they're literally a foot away from you.
Right. It's very a lot of close-ups.
Yeah. How close are you to this action? Like you're literally sitting right next to them.
Yeah.
So there really isn't any kind of, soaring mountain ranges and things. It's like you're in the same room with these people when this is happening.
Yeah. I would even agree with that on like, you see Norton, digging around the garbage, and, they illustrate like all the water running down, and you could hear the splish splashing, and you could like, as you're looking at those panels, like you could smell it.
Yeah.
You could smell it. You're like, oh yeah.
We're unlocking all 5 senses.
Yes, absolutely. So I could definitely see where that sensory could come into play. And you're like, okay, I imagine this space or enhancing that sound. Absolutely.
Well, and I think the colors, again, just to like mention that, I mean, the colors hold true through the whole book, but every time he uses red, it's entirely purposeful.
Yeah.
I mean, there isn't really red used in any sort of natural spots except for like blood or markers, or they circle something, or like something's terrible, like really like this intense evil. It's like, that's red. It's just, they don't even try to bring anything else in. It's like, if evil is there, it's red. It's
right.
Yeah,
or
they're not trying to be
there's weird like
discreet
line
about
boxes
it.
around it
Yeah,
too, or
yes.
it'll be like focus
Yeah.
enhancing. Yeah.
Well, and then there's a character called the Bishop, and
the Bishop.
I've been kind of saving this spot too. So
okay.
So the Bishop, you find out, is sort of a background player, and he's the one who told the preacher to go to Gideon Falls, and the Bishop, what? Father.
Yes. Oh yeah.
So he assigned him to Gideon Falls, and he's been sort of keeping in touch with him, and they talk on the phone and things. But again, he has red. His red is anything that's like religious also became a red. So then you kind of start wondering if there's a connection between the religion and the sort of evil, or there's a connection back to the red of the barn, and then a red of, any kind of violence.
Oh, those
so then
commonalities.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you start connecting, like, okay, so the Bishop has a connection to the Gideon Falls, and the Gideon Falls has connection to the barn, and the barn has connection to violence, and violence, it's, you just kind of start seeing that when you're reading through the book too. You start noticing anything that's needs to be pulled out is red, like circled in red or something too. Like, pay attention to this. This is something.
Well, and the
and some of the text bubbles.
Oh
too.
yes, when the villain is talking, it's in rod text as well, so you know when he is speaking.
Yes. Oh, Blaize, tell us about the villain now.
You want me to?
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to give any spoilers.
You don't have.
He's so scary.
Is kind of a weird villain.
The smiling man.
The smiling man.
Yes.
And
Don't they
all
even call him
his
the man?
million teeth.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Which is so weird, because it's like a skull, but not, right? Like it's too wide to be just a skull, like a skull.
Right. And the smiling man, he controls the Black Barn of sorts. He is kind of, that's where he resides, supposedly. He has this really deep connection to it.
Yeah. And he, I want to say that he like tries to influence people to do bad things, but like he's not trying to like recruit people. He's not like a zombie. He's not like a zombie.
No, he's not
lord.
turning people into zombies per se. Or he doesn't really start out that way.
Like he doesn't want like an army of zombies. Like,
well, he just
at the
needs
beginning.
The one.
Yeah.
The one.
Yes. Just needs to find the one.
Yes. I would say that's correct, and he's also trying to find a way out.
Yeah. Okay. So he's given himself to the evil, but he also is promised many things, and that's usually the other trope too. Is that if you are going to worship something, that you're going to be their number one, right? Like you're going to travel with the evil to their evil promised land, kind of thing.
Yeah, that kind of confused me when he mentioned like, oh, the things I've done for him. I was like, aren't you the him that people are supposed to be
Well, yeah, but then
doing
that
things
gives the
for?
idea of like there's a bigger bad boy than him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's always a bigger fish.
That's right. No matter how big or
Yes.
small you are.
Rule number one, there's always a bigger fish.
Fish.
As much as you think you are the top evil entity, you're not. And so once the barn kind of gets established and the evil smiling man appears, you kind of start getting these checks. You check off, okay, we know who the villain is. Okay, we kind of know why he's doing things, because he's trying to sort of appease his master. And they start honing in on who these characters actually are and like why they are important. And as soon as the smiling man starts, I don't want to say like kidnapping people, I guess.
Yeah.
He starts funneling them towards the barn. Like he really
Influencing them.
Yes.
them.
Yes.
Yeah.
There you go.
Like a man in a white van with candy.
Yeah. Right. a evil smiling.
Yeah.
Yeah. Got some it tropes in
Yeah.
there,
Yeah. I mean, actually it kind of does, because he really wants to bring these particular people in, and you're like, what is the big deal with these particular people
Mhm.
who are now our main characters that we love, that we don't want anything to happen to?
Mhm.
So then now you're like, all right, you've taken 8 issues to establish them as main characters, and now it's like,
And now we're attached to them.
Yes.
Emotionally.
Yeah.
Or
Now
whatever.
we don't want anything to happen to them. So what are you doing here?
What were some of your favorite characters to follow? Blaize.
I really liked Clara, honestly.
Yeah.
I feel like she was my favorite just because she gave off like the strong, independent, like
Strong female.
hardworking woman.
Mhm.
And then it's like, oh well, maybe deep down she is a little sad, and you find out more about her, and then she kind of starts crumbling a little bit. I get like losing it slowly, like
Mhm.
along with all the other characters, as the book also loses itself with the panels and such.
Yeah, absolutely. I think she thought she knew everything. She knew it all.
Mhm.
She was very her values stubborn. Kind of. This is the way it is. I had a tragic upbringing. I lost my brother, and my father's kind of deranged,
Yeah.
and she doesn't know really what's going on, but she knows the rules. And
And
once
she
one
knows that she needs to work.
and she knows, yep,
Like, because a lot of her things, when she was talking with her dad, would
yep.
be,
Hmm.
I can't hear this. I don't need to think about this. Like, I just need to work.
Yes, she very much fell into like a workaholic.
Mhm.
She became her life,
I
and
mean,
what she knew.
And that's, they've set her up as, a pretty high ranking member of the police department. So then you always just think, well, that's what she's meant to do. And you don't realize that there is a pretty developed backstory that, we weren't really privy to right away.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That we just figured, well, she's just a hard hitting cop.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she's just a hard ass.
Yeah, like, she doesn't care about anybody. And then you realize, actually, she cares about a lot of people.
yeah.
Yeah.
She's just kind of suppressed that,
Right.
deep down.
She just
because
pushed
of
that
what
to
happened.
her career.
Absolutely. And then once one piece of the puzzle just falls away, or some new rule came in, or something she didn't know about, she's just like, just trying to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Which is where her detective skills come in. Yeah, she's awesome.
Yeah. I kind of liked Norton. I thought that he was a good character to sort of guide us through, mostly because he seemed like he had a secret that you just wanted to know.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the other characters I felt like were just sort of along for the ride a little bit, where like, the father was just there, and so was some of the other, like his psychiatrist was just sort of also trying to figure him out, right?
Right.
So with Norton, to me, I felt like he hung on to the mystery of himself longer than most other people.
Yes.
And so I felt like he was carrying the story a little bit longer than some of the others.
Yeah, because it took him a long time for him to gain enough confidence to actually go up against the villain.
Right.
Or like he felt strong enough to pursue the Black Barn. He had all the pieces, but he had nobody to support him. So he was kind of lost in a way.
Yeah. So with the Black Barn part of it, I mean, we can enter into mild spoiler territory, but because there's still a lot of story that I'm not worried that we're like ruining the story, but
Yeah.
it is important to note that like the Black Barn itself is something of a portal, and you get that idea right away. You just like realize, okay, so there's something more to this. It's not just literally like a building. Like there has to be something terrible in there. So Norton, sees this evil, violent being, and he just realizes, you know what, he's here for me. So in true hero fashion, I will go forth and I will go into the barn. Yeah. Well, at that point, when he makes that decision, there's other people that are also to that hero level where they're like becoming destructive, and so they're like,
sure,
I'm going in the barn too.
Yeah.
So we kind of have like 4 people go in the barn at the same time. I think all the 4 main characters walk into the barn.
The doctor, right? The priest, I think the psychiatrist.
Yeah, well, that's another callback too, then, because when it shows the village nearest the center. It talks about like
the plowmen, and you got to have like
your 4 people.
Yeah,
because they're sending their 5 or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. There was like certain like character types that had to be along with that they've always had in the past that are part of the plowman group that have been going on for generations and generations and things like that.
The madman, the soldier, the sinner, the doctor, and the father.
Oh, good job.
See, so everyone has a role. So then you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, as soon as they get through the barn, I think that the evil smiling man didn't realize that there were so many people who would fight him. He thought more people would be scared of him,
Right.
And so immediately the barn opens up into what I feel like is a well advertised part of this. So that's why I don't feel like it's, but it opens up into other worlds, and you realize that as, one is falling out of their world, there are others that are falling into a different world.
Yes.
And that's kind of when you first, I think, realize that these are all different storylines that you've been reading.
Yeah.
Which is pretty awesome for Jeff Lemire to kind of do that. And he does that in a lot of his books. He kind of does this like, aha, got you.
Which makes a really good writer.
Yeah.
If you could do that. Pull that off.
It makes a good writer that you don't see it.
Yeah.
Right? Like you don't see it happening. And you're like, oh man, I guess I should think of it this other way. He kind of like spins things kind of oddly out of place. And then you don't realize that all along he's been telling this story, but you just haven't seen it.
Sure. And I don't think he would have necessarily had to put that storytelling device in there. You could have just had it about the Black Barn and the Smiling Man.
Yeah. Well,
but
yeah.
It
right.
actually adds on a different layer to the book. It puts that extra spin on it, which is interesting that he did that.
That he felt like part of his story had to also be this long prologue. I guess. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think so. I mean, I would have been glad. I'm like, what's in the barn? How do we defeat the Smiling Man? Things like that. And then
that would have been like page 5 for Andrew. He's like, here's the barn. Everybody in. I don't have patience to drag this out for 10 issues.
Because half the battle is trying to get to the barn.
Yes.
Because the barn lives in its like otherworldly space.
Yes.
Everybody's trying to figure out how to, first of all, get there. Believe in it, get there, and then you encounter like the Smiling Man coming out. So that was literally half the battle. And then you kind of find out, Gideon Falls is just one of multi-worlds.
Yeah, well, and that was the coolest thing.
There's different worlds.
Yeah, that there's a Gideon Falls in like every multiverse, and that Gideon Falls is always has the same people. So this is
Yes.
like, once you get into the second book, it becomes like, all right, so you know about Gideon Falls, you know about 2 Gideon Falls.
Yeah.
And then you realize that there's hundreds and hundreds and
Yeah,
hundreds of Gideon
infinite.
Falls.
Yeah.
And in each Gideon Falls, because now our heroes have to try to like get back home. So now they're like stumbling through all these other multiverses. And in each Gideon Falls that they fall into, they realize, well, this one is kind of like my house, my home, in that it has religion, and it has the engineer, and it has the everyone you just named
Oh yeah.
is,
Yeah.
is sort of, those pieces are in each world a little bit, but they're really different. So like some of them have like floating Hindenburg kind of things, and
Right. One was more, like very far, like Blade Runner-y sci-fi.
yes,
One was very low tech. Just he did it like in every variation almost, and we get to see that, which is really cool. But I also think it was really smart to say we're just talking about Gideon Falls. We're not talking about anywhere else in the world and their universes. We're
Good
just talking
point.
about one common place.
yeah.
Because otherwise, if you start bridging that into multiple cities or multiple things like that, you get to lose it. But I really felt that was really smart of him to go, we're only talking about one city.
Yeah, and then you kind of realize, well, what is special about actually Gideon Falls? And it's like that Norton is what's special. You know?
Yes.
So it's like he always comes back to his main character. Jeff Lemire loves his main characters.
Absolutely. So yeah. Overall, I really appreciated it. I think it definitely had you kept guessing and wanting to invest in the characters and the world building. Absolutely, I think.
Mhm.
And I did appreciate what you said earlier, Blaize. Like you definitely had to kind of reread some parts or go back and figure out, oh, this character was important way back here. And they said
Yeah.
something.
Yeah, there was a lot of that too. Like how I said, the Easter eggs. Like I noticed a few times someone would use a phrase and then later it would be the exact same phrase,
Right.
or like just a few like little objects, and it was like, oh, okay, I guess now that I've seen that again, I guess that must be important. Like,
Absolutely. Because you never really know what's important till like later on. You're like, oh, okay. And then
Mhm.
once you have all the information, it's so rewarding. to
Well,
tell
it
that.
kind of makes it rereadable,
Right. Absolutely. If that's what he was going for.
Yeah, I mean that's the other thing too, is like, oh, you know what? And maybe a year down the road, you'll say, oh, I'm going to read this again and see what the heck all that was, and try to pick up on those pieces,
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time too, with stories like this, Blaize, would you say that this is a good introductory comic, or you think this was a little too convoluted for someone just grabbing a comic? And
no, I think it was good. I mean,
I don't know what the
Obvious-
age limit is on this.
the age
It's
limit-
about-
We should think
ages-
about that.
ages
Pretty
8
mature.
plus.
It does say M for mature,
Sure. Yeah.
but it wasn't like
okay.
no.
It's not like it's
it,
gory.
yeah, and
No.
it wasn't totally adult. Like we've read some pretty
Yeah.
adult stuff.
Yeah.
It says it's M for mature for horror, occult, and supernatural. So
I guess the
Okay.
occultness.
yeah, I guess if you are not really into the whole occult kind of
Cult
thing,
conspiracy.
if you like horror, cool. But if you like the weirdo religion, anti-religion, maybe not.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you could say there's a lot of, he's really digging into what is religion in this book and what different characters and different backgrounds think of religion, and are they for it, against it? Do they totally skew away from it and try to ground themselves in science? Try to explain things.
Well, okay, so that's a weird, like,
Yeah.
I think I had that on my like mental notes. So like, while they do have religious people in this,
Mhm.
I don't feel like they set up the evil smiling man as like a religious anti anything.
Right.
I feel like it was just like what did you think it was? Like it's just someone, like an entity out there, right?
Yeah, I feel like it was just, yeah, exactly. Like it's just an entity. It's just a thing. It doesn't,
Like an
and it
alien.
just wants
Yeah.
anything, like anyone. It doesn't just want like religious people or like
Yeah.
the non-religious main characters. Like he'll just take it all. He'll take anyone he can get,
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think he wanted people to acknowledge that he exists and to develop some sort of following, but nothing like so overt
like a religious following, right?
Yeah.
Like, and they didn't
That's what
set
it's
it up
called.
like it was like, yeah, like a devil or anything.
Yeah.
I think they set it
No.
up as something was unlocked, like some evil power was unlocked,
Yes.
and it just happened to be like insect-like a little bit, like so it was,
That's
yeah, so it was just so like it was weird, but yeah. So and Jeff Lemire kind of, I think, plays on that as the creepy factor, like these are creepy bugs and stuff.
Mhm.
And it almost had like a weird Men in Black thing. Wasn't there like a bug
Yeah,
thing in Men in
yeah,
Black?
absolutely.
There was. And it was like a bug man in Men in Black or something.
Like bugs don't scare me, but they definitely like make my hair raise a little bit. Like if you pull it
You
off
can
very
say you're
well.
scared. It's okay.
It's okay.
Oh, if you do it like creepy, like cockroaches.
This is
and
a safe
stuff.
space. It's all right.
Yeah.
Look, I already said Children of the Corn was.
Yeah, I already admitted Children of the Corn. I can't even look at it. Well, and that's just what it is. It's like I think what happened was it unlocked some alien presence that's just out there.
Right.
That's like way beyond anything humans can
Any
handle.
comprehension.
Right.
Yeah,
Like,
they can
yeah.
comprehend. Right.
So you can't pigeonhole it into religion. It's just literally just like an
Yeah.
evil thing.
right.
Which I appreciated that a lot too, because I feel like for horror movies, it's either like exorcism and evil spirits and religion, or like the flip side of that. And then this
Kind of
one
plays
was-
on the line.
Yeah, it's kind of like,
Or just kind of
Is
out in
it?
its own space
is
between
it
the
like
two.
a devil
Yeah.
character? Is it not? Like, what's
Sure.
going on here? Because
Well-
religion plays such a big part in this book, obviously. So
Yeah,
then
and they
it's
Yeah.
keep
like-
going back to it, and I think they're trying to say all of these characters have their certain traits of what they believe that they can battle. So like,
Yeah.
Clara can battle anything that like the police would handle, and like the psychologist can battle mental things, and the doctor can battle, conspiracy theorists, and they kind of go through it of what everyone can battle, and then they say, okay, well then that's all cool for you guys, but here's this bigger, badder, evil
Mhm.
thing
That not one of you can defeat on your
that
own.
not one of you can defeat. And it's not something that like a superhero comic where they would all just start hacking and slashing and punching it.
Right. No.
That's not going to work. And so they kind of set it up right away that it wasn't like a physical fight, because sometimes comics are like, oh, let's go get
get
the axe.
stronger
Yeah.
and go.
Yeah.
Get the shotguns, get the axe.
I mean, they have those parts in
we're gonna
there where there's
handle this.
like a weaponry, and like they tried like blowing up the barn. Well, there's
Yeah,
some
a little bit.
consequences.
I mean, there is like what they would consider as like how they would normally attack stuff, but
Yeah.
they realize it doesn't work.
Mhm.
Right. So
Yes,
they kind
absolutely.
of build it up that way.
Yeah. It's very cool how they laid that out. I
Yeah.
really appreciated it. And yeah, it took all these little commonality like tropes and just spun them a bit
Mhm.
and just seeing what he could push and pull and really just see what extremes they could pull out and make the characters doubt, make the characters go through all these trials.
Well, and sometimes comics are just the writer trying to see how far that they can stretch the
Yep.
medium.
It sounds like Jeff from there.
Yeah. Good job, Jeff. Good job.
Yeah. No, we'll keep reading. We'll keep reading.
We'll read the next thing you put out. Don't worry.
Yeah. And so I guess right now, I'll just touch like Jeff Lemire. He is currently writing, he just put out Bone Orchid story. So it's kind of the same team, same creative team that did this series, but it's a little different. I don't know. It's still like ongoing. He just wrote Fish Flies, and he's always continuing out. He did a Robin and Batman series.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, with Justin Wynn. That was really good. And I think he's one of the busiest writers like out there. Like seriously, Little Monsters came out last year. That was like Eisner winning. May's book was his huge book that really got a lot of acclaim and attention that he wrote and drew. So that was really interesting.
Yeah. And of course, I think a lot of people know him from Sweet Tooth, probably becoming,
Yeah.
Jumping Mediums and being in Netflix and things. And so,
Essex County's coming out soon.
oh yeah,
yeah,
Essex
that's
County.
live adaptation that's coming along. So that'll be really cool.
I think this story, if we were to sort of sum it all up, I think it's got just enough horror in it, but also just enough like what we'd consider sci-fi, because it kind of does have that little tech edge to it a little bit. But at the same time, is it super Jeff Lemire? Kinda. I mean, the writing is, but if you're looking at some of his other comics that he drew, it's not like that. I think he's sort of bringing his stories into other artists' minds and letting them run with it a little more.
Yeah.
Because he's self-illustrated so many of his books, so that people kind of get an idea of what they would think of Jeff Lemire.
And I think he's very, I don't know, he really knows how to find his artist too. He knows what intentional feel it is. Like Andrea Sorrentino, this is like their style that they incorporated into like Old Man Logan, and they did a Green Arrow run on as well. So he's very familiar with their work. And so when you want to do something horror, like, all right, this is your chance, like flex your muscles and go for it. Because he doesn't really go all the way horror with any of his other books. So I think this was like one you could like really, explore that space and that genre.
Yeah, definitely. I would suggest you find the hardcover editions. There's only 2, book 1 and 2. Book 2 is called Eater of All Things, and that's a great way to end it all for that.
Blaize, are you going to continue to read comics or explore the medium?
She's in it.
Yes.
She's in it.
At least for long enough for me to read the second book.
Figure out like all what we're talking about, all the clues and how it adds up. Absolutely. Very cool. And that's what we want to encourage new readers too, is there's still such a thing as picking up a comic off the shelf. Maybe it's not Marvel or DC. Maybe it's an indie book, because there's no like worries about continuity.
Right.
You can just pick up a book off the shelf that's like an image book, that's independent, and you can just start from there.
Yeah, who knew? Not me. I thought all comic books were like superheroes. I didn't know, you guys.
And it is funny because, I mean, some people will say, well, you know what? I'm not into comics because I like things that are just a little more realistic. And it's like, actually, there's pretty realistic comics, and there's, some, like we said, that really approach some tough stories like Mouse, and they kind of draw it in a different way and they write it in a different way. And it's, it's from a first person perspective, and it's just something that you can wrap your head around and really kind of just see what, I don't know, what's out there as an artistic side, but also what's out there as just a writing side, and see how they blend the two. And that's really what it is.
Yeah. And and then there's also like young adult novels that are continuing to explore different issues in the LGBT community, stuff that are a little harder issues that maybe they can kind of put a positive twist on, that's different entry point in as well. So still tons of entry points into comics today.
Yes.
The field is so open, definitely always opportunity to pick up a new comic.
Yes.
I'm serious. All right, Blaize, thanks for coming on the show. We appreciate
you so much,
it.
you guys.
This has been another great episode of Bam Pow Comic Hour. This is Andrew Bonner
And Chris Ramos.
and
Blaize Butler.
signing off.